Hi everybody, we're out here at the Desert Botanical Garden in Phoenix, and we're kind of in the back part of the botanical garden where they have all of their vegetables, and there's some sunflowers back there growing, and we thought it would be a good idea to show you some stuff that you could plant for a late spring garden. We know everyone is inside, social distancing, and this is a good way to kind of stay active and do something that could help you or your family by growing your own food. So we have Tracy over here. She's a horticulturalist, at the botanical gardens here, and she's going to be showing us a bunch of different stuff that you can do. And the first thing that we have over here is summer squash. And so take it away, Tracy.
Well, thank you so much for coming out. We've been so excited to hear how many people with a little extra time on their hands this spring have gotten into vegetable gardening and growing their own food. We really encourage that. Arizona is actually a fantastic place to grow vegetables. The key is all in the timing of when to grow them and knowing kind of what to grow when. Right now we're kind of in the end of what I'd call our spring planting period. March was kind of the prime time for putting in our spring vegetables, but April still gives us a great opportunity to put some things in, and we're going to talk about some of the things that you still can put in the ground today and get a successful harvest over the late spring and summer. The first one, as mentioned, was the summer squash. This is an early straight neck yellow squash. A lot of people don't know the difference between summer and winter squash. They think maybe it's the time of year that they're grown. They're actually grown at the same time. We put them both into the ground right now. The difference is that a summer squash is picked fresh and is intended basic. It's got a very thin skin, so you really want to eat it right away. It doesn't keep very well. Whereas a winter squash, like an acorn squash or a pumpkin, is storable. It's got a nice thick rind to it, and it will stay edible for weeks or months, so you can store them for later. That's the big difference between a summer and winter squash. So what we're planting is a summer squash. And what I've done is created a mound of dirt, maybe just a foot or 18 inches across. Typically you want to put them maybe 2 or 3 feet away from each other. Mine are a little close, that's okay. And I'm going to take maybe 3 or 4 of these little squash seeds. And a rule of thumb for when you're planting seeds is you want to put them at a planting depth that's about twice the diameter of the seed. It's a good rule of thumb. So in this case, these little seeds being about a ½ inch, we're going to want to put them about 1 inch down in the soil. So I'm just going to dibble a little hole here. I like to kind of stand them vertically with their edges facing up, because that leaf's going to come right out of the top. And then I'll just stick them in there. Easy peasy. Cover them up with a little soil. When they come up, I'm probably going to pick the strongest one and just thin them down, which means taking out the other 2 and just leaving the strongest one there, because as you can see over here, these guys are going to form a big bush plant that's going to get several feet across. So you want to give them some room to grow, and probably 1 per mound is going to be enough to give them that space. And you can see these ones are already getting little tiny yellow squashes on them.
Oh yeah, look at that.
They're really satisfying too to plant these, because they come up really quickly. So you're going to see results in less than a week. Just keep the soil nice and damp once you put the seeds in the ground, and watch for them to come up. And summer squashes have both female and male flowers on the same plant. So you can tell the females because they've got a tiny little proto squash at the bottom of them, whereas the males just have a really thin skinny stem. And the males want to pollinate the females, and if you don't see bees or other critters doing it for you, then you can actually do that yourself. You can take a little Q-tip or a paintbrush and sort of dip it into the male flower and get the pollen on there, and then just dip it into the female flower, and that will pollinate it, and you'll make sure you get lots of produce.
Oh, very cool.
So that's squashes, and they're fun to grow. Summer squashes tend to be bushers. The winter squashes tend to be what we call viners. So they'll actually send out vines versus just kind of staying in one place. So make sure if you're growing a winter squash or something that, or a watermelon or a pumpkin, that you're giving those vines lots of room to grow. Put them on the edge of your garden or someplace where they really have room to spread out.
How much water would it require?
Well, the key in watering something is to get an adequate depth of watering. Like, a lot of people think that if they just come out every day and kind of run a wand over it real quick, then that's going to be enough. But what you may not be getting is the penetration of water down into the soil, because every time you water, you want to make sure that that water is going down to where the roots actually live, which are 6 to 12 inches maybe below the surface in some cases. So you want a long, slow soak that's going to get a depth of 10 to 12 inches of water into that soil. And then you can wait a couple days, because soil needs air as well as water. So if you give it that little cycle where you give it a deep water, give it a day or two's rest, and then water it deeply again, you're going to have really great results.
Cool.
Another way that you can tell whether or not you need to water is to buy yourself an inexpensive moisture meter. You can buy these at any big box home store like Home Depot or Lowe's, and you basically just stick it into the soil. And see, right now I've got a really good, even though it looks dry on the top, this is telling me that underneath it's still very damp. So I don't need to water right now, but just looking at the surface, I might think that I needed to. Overwatering can be a problem, even in the desert. So it's really good to try to get a feel for what kind of watering schedule your plants will take once they're in the ground. But yeah, deep waterings and lots of sun. All these guys are sun lovers that we're growing this season.
Great, perfect for Arizona.
Absolutely, yeah. Another great thing to put in right now is sweet potatoes. And you can buy slips at the store that look kind of like this. They just come in little 6-packs, or you can start your own. You can get an organic sweet potato, or try to find maybe some at one of your nurseries. But basically what happens is when you take a sweet potato and put it into water, you can cut it in half and do 2 if you want. Just stick maybe, you know, a half inch or an inch or so of it in water. You can do the toothpick thing where you stick it over a jar, but what's going to happen, you see it sometimes in your pantry too, if you leave them too long, is you're going to get these growths, these shoots coming out that are called slips. You can actually snip off these slips, put them into water or into damp soil, and they in turn will develop roots. So that's a lot of times how we start a lot of potato starts, is to develop these slips, let them grow out of the base, put them into water, let them develop their own roots, which those roots will eventually become sweet potatoes. That's where they form. And then stick them in the ground and just keep it nice and damp, and they should start taking off. Now's the perfect time of year to put in sweet potatoes. And you can put them in a little mound like we did with the squash if you'd like. That's sometimes a really easy way to sort of get them started and have them trail out from there. We are on kind of the end of what would be our tomato and pepper and eggplant season. We really kind of wanted those in. This is the tail end of when we'd want them in, but you can still plant them. If you have a nice sturdy transplant that you've gotten from a nursery store or you've grown your own, you can still transplant them for sure. When you're planting a tomato, when you take it out of the container, a lot of times what we do is we actually strip off the leaves of this tomato, because what's going to happen, like with the sweet potato, its cousin, every place that we bury this stem below the soil is going to develop roots. So when I'm planting it, and tomatoes do very well in containers, just make sure it's at least this size and depth or larger. Nice, well-draining soil. Always have a drainage hole in the bottom. So we're going to plant it really deeply and get some of that stem making contact with the soil. You just want to leave a couple of leaf sets at the top, 2 or 3 at the top, and anything under that you can go ahead and plant in the soil. And whenever that's touching, those roots are going to develop and give it a nice strong root system in the end, a lot more energy to grow. And then in a few weeks they'll start looking like this. Another good thing to know about tomatoes is the type of tomato you're growing. There's 2 primary types of tomato plants that we cultivate. The first one is called a bush or determinate style tomato, and those grow to a certain height, like shrubs in our garden often, and then they'll kind of stop and just put out all of their fruit at once. So they'll stay typically smaller. The determinate ones are the ones you probably want to grow in containers if you're going to grow them. And that, you know, they kind of like have a set cycle, whereas the other type are called vining or indeterminate tomatoes. And those just keep going. Those are the ones that you see get 8 or 10 feet tall. They can really get away from you. Mm. And those are the ones that we really like to practice pruning on, like tomato pruning, which basically consists of choosing the main stem. So you see this nice main stem right here, and then clipping off what we call suckers. And the suckers come out from the base of the leaf. You see there's this little guy right there. We call that a sucker. That's going to eventually be a big stem like this, but if you get too many of those, it really gets away from you. For one thing, it becomes hard to control in your garden, and it kind of dilutes the amount of energy that the plant has available to put out good fruit. So by sort of limiting those and just training it to 1 or 2 good stems, you're really focusing all that growth energy where you want it and making sure you get a good production of fruit. So I'm going to take this little sucker here and just pinch it off at the base, just like that. And I could actually even take this and root it and make another plant if I wanted, if it was long enough. But in this case, I don't really need any more. I've got 30 tomatoes, so I'm good. So yeah, if you just kind of keep doing this, and this is a case of a sucker that kind of got away from me. So this is what happens if you don't take them off. I'm probably going to keep that one just because, you know, it's the only one I have, and it's going to be okay. So you can kind of play around with it. You don't have to be super strict with your pruning, but you can leave 1 or 2 just to get a little extra fruit out of it. But kind of maintaining that basic main stem and being sure to trellis it, because once those tomatoes get big, they're going to get heavy and the plant's going to want to fall over. So doing some sort of trellising that supports the plant. It could even be a pole in the middle that you've kind of wrapped, you know, the tomato stem next to give it support. Is really going to help you both be very efficient with your garden space and make sure that you've got a nice manageable tomato.
Cool.
Yeah. Peppers are another thing that we can put in right now. This is a cute little Shido pepper that you see in a lot of restaurants. They serve them as appetizers. They just it's a really nice little snacking pepper. If you put peppers and eggplant in this time of year, they may not get to the point where they put out fruit before the summer hits, because for most of these plants, the tomatoes, the peppers, the eggplant, we really want to get them in time to produce fruit by June, because the plants, the flowers, the pollen in the flowers after about 95 or 100 degrees Fahrenheit will stop pollinating. It'll stop setting fruit. So our goal when we're planting, especially tomatoes, is to try to get them in time to have a harvest by June, which means that smaller tomatoes tend to work better for us, the pears, the romas, the little cherry tomatoes. But you can get the big beefsteaks in if you just, plan ahead. And shade cloth is another thing that can make a big difference. If you have the ability to get a 40 or 50% shade cloth, which is one that cuts 40 to 50% of the intensity of the sun that we get in the afternoon, then that's going to make a big difference in your ability to grow plants once it gets hot. You can find that shade cloth at most of the local nurseries will carry something like that. You don't want the shade cloth that is used for patios, because that's more like 70 to 80%, and that's going to be too dark. They do want sun. They just don't want to get sunburned. It's kind of like, I think of shade cloth as kind of like us wearing sunscreen. Like, we're still getting the sun, but it's not, you're getting a layer of protection that keeps us from getting burned, and that's all a shade cloth does. So even if these peppers don't put out anything by the time summer hits, if you just keep them watered and keep them growing and kind of nurse them, then by the time monsoons come around, they'll get a second opportunity to fruit. And so if you could just kind of keep them going through the summer, then when monsoons hit and we get those cooler nights and that rainier weather, then you could potentially get. All right, and there's all sorts of other things we can put in the ground right now. Pumpkins, it's a great time to plant pumpkins. Cucumbers, this is a little lemon cucumber that's, if you don't have a lot of space, this is a great one to grow because the cucumbers are very small when they're ripe and you can trellis them very easily. So it's a great plant for a small space. We can definitely do watermelons right now. I've got some little babies in the ground. Sunflowers you can grow basically all summer long. You could put a sunflower in any time of year and it'll pop right up. They just love our climate. So as you can see, I've got an array of sunflowers over here. These ones on the left are awesome about those. They don't produce seeds, but they don't produce seeds that we can eat. I've got an American giant to the right that will do that for us. But they'll produce a lot of seeds that birds will go mad for. So you'll get so many birds coming into your garden if you plant these native sunflowers. Finches all day long, maybe even the rosy-faced lovebirds. So that's a really great way to feed our local population sometimes, is by planting these things. Also, planting edible flowers in a garden is a great thing to do, like these little pansies. Not only because they're fun to throw into a salad, but because they do attract other bugs and pollinators that will in turn, stick around and hopefully pollinate your vegetables as well. It's a great time of year to grow herbs. Basil is the big herb.
That's popular.
We grow this year. Oh, who doesn't love basil? It's great. This is a nice Genovese or Italian sweet leaf basil. This is a perfect time of year to put in basils. And they'll love the sun. They're very much sun lovers. I've got a whole patch of them over here that I put in a few weeks ago. As these get larger, I'll want to start harvesting them. I don't want them to go to flower. Like I see right here that this one's starting to form a little flower head. And I don't want that because I want it to keep putting out leaves, not flowers. So I'll just take that and I'll kind of pinch off that little flower part and really encourage it to just keep putting out new leaves. And when I go to harvest it to cook with it, what I like to do is look at the base of the basil. What you see, again, kind of like with the tomatoes, is a new set of leaves coming up above the main leaf. So if I harvest this right above those secondary leaves like that, then these are going to grow up and create a bushier plant in the long run. So I'll actually get more harvest if I keep kind of picking little bits off of this basil and allowing these secondary leaves to come back up in its place and keeping it from flowering.
And even you just picking that flower off, like you can smell it. It's so aromatic.
I know, isn't it amazing?
Yeah.
There's a lot of different types of basils you can grow. You can play around with them. There's a beautiful one called Mrs. Burns Lemon that's very lemony and aromatic. There's Thai basil, if you do any Asian cooking. It's got that little bit of an anisey or licoricey taste to it, but it's absolutely amazing in stir fries. And kind of, if you're doing Thai cooking, you really want to have some Thai basil around to make it taste authentic. There's cinnamon basils and lime basils. There's a lot of fun ones to play around. Some very decorative ones too. Like you can see here, this little tiny guy coming up here is called an amethyst basil, and it stays that dark purple. So it's a beautiful, sort of ornamental basil as well as a culinary one. And it is a true sweet basil that tastes just like the regular ones. So that's one of my favorites to grow is the amethyst, just because it is so lovely.
Yeah.
So you can see we've got our bigger peppers here that have already been in for a few weeks. We've got some, I think, watermelon in the back.
And then over here you had another cool thing, a loofah that you could grow for yourself.
Yeah, right. So another fun plant to grow is the loofah. A lot of people don't realize that where loofah sponges come from that we use in the kitchen and bathroom, it's not a sea plant or a sea creature like a lot of people think. It actually comes from a vine, like a squash vine. It's a loofah gourd. And these are baby loofahs right here. So I'm going to grow these, right now I'm going to put them in the ground. They're going to grow all summer. Probably towards late summer is when they'll start putting out their flowers and their little loofahs. I'll need to leave those fresh loofahs on the vine and leave a lot of room for the vines. These things will take over a garden. But once they do develop, they look basically like a zucchini at first. They've got a green skin on them, and they form this kind of squash shape. But if we leave them on the vine until they dry out entirely, and it requires a lot of patience because you want to pick them not until they've completely dried out. And then what you're left with is this sort of framework, and everything else kind of dries up and crumbles off. And there's seeds, actually, that you'll find on the inside. These ones I grew from seeds that I had harvested from last year's loofahs. So, once you get those seeds out and you get all the old flesh off, what you're left with is a great sponge.
Awesome.
Well, also we can put beans in right now, yard-long beans, cowpeas. We can put in, I said cucumbers. Amaranth is an interesting one to grow. It's coming into the season for amaranth. A lot of people, it's related to a weed called pigweed that we see around a lot, but this is an edible amaranth. The leaves can be eaten, they are edible. And also what we grow it for is the flower head. It gets this long, beautiful, red, sort of spiky flower head, and the seeds inside those are the amaranth that we see in like kind bars or like granola bars, when you see amaranth listed as an ingredient, that's that little seed that comes from the flower head off of the amaranth. And the leaves are also edible like spinach. So it's a great plant because the entirety of it is edible, and it just loves our heat.
Awesome.
And can be very beautiful too. There's a plant called Love Lies Bleeding that a lot of people have heard of. It's, you know, got a long sort of spiky red flower on it, and that's a form of amaranth as well. So it can be very decorative.
Cool. Well, it seems like there are a lot of options for people to grow things here, even in the heat of Arizona. So hope you guys are all able to get out into the garden and enjoy some gardening and some homegrown veggies or some beautiful sunflowers if you choose to grow those. Tomorrow, 12 News, we're going to be back out here. We're going to be at Gertrude's. They're going to be showing us some of their recipes of stuff that you can take out of your garden and grow, or that you've grown and you can make for yourself at home. So we hope to see you out here tomorrow for that. And yeah, thanks for joining us for today. Have a great one, guys.